Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the professor, and this is the moment of truth.
That was Merrick Garland this morning sharing a very disturbing anecdote included in the findings of the Justice Department's 2-year investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department. The DOJ launched its review in the wake of George Floyd's death and the murder conviction of Derek Chauvin, the Minneapolis police officer who kneeled on Floyd's neck and killed him. Today, in a damning 89-page report, the Justice Department accused the Minneapolis Police Department of rampant use of excessive force, unlawful discrimination, and violations of constitutional rights. Here are more of the shocking examples of the abuses they discovered. Quote, MPD disproportionately stops Black and Native American people and patrols differently based on the racial composition of the neighborhood without a legitimate related safety rationale. Joining us now is Philip Atiba Goff. Dr. Goff is the chair of African American Studies and professor of psychology at Yale University. He's also a co-founder of the Center for Policing Equity. What did you make of this report?
What I made of the report is that it looks, first of all, thank goodness for Kristen Clark and for the good women, men, and non-binary folks in the Special Litigation Unit that do incredibly thankless work that make this possible, that allow us to read this kind of stuff. But also thank goodness for the men, women, and non-binary folks in the Minnesota Human Rights Department that did a very similar report.
Well, did you get all that? Not hard to figure out why MSNBC likes having this guy on. I mean, he ticks all the check boxes, doesn't he? He's the kind of clown who will tell Black people everything ain't about race. It's about class, don't you know? It's about smashing the patriarchy, don't you know? It's about institutional structures of blah, blah, blah. That's the kind of person he is. Merrick Garland's report about the Minneapolis Police Department is getting white media coverage, but so what? It tells us absolutely nothing we didn't already know. We don't need yet another litany of the racism practiced every minute of every day by yet another police department, because people have known this for decades. This isn't news. In 2006, during W's administration, the FBI put out a notice saying that the white supremacists had infiltrated every level of law enforcement in America, though they conveniently left out that there's white supremacists in the FBI. This report was only about 80 years late, but for the white media it was news, though not important enough for them to report on. The Black media, however, has reported on it and continues to. And can you believe this Goff bastard that they had on had the nerve to say thank God for Kristen Clark of all people? This puke is a white media plant. He's one of their cherry-picked go-to Negroes who will repeat their line of crap. Anyone who praises Kristen Clark is a willing and knowing accomplice in her aiding and abetting of leaving white supremacist killers on the streets or trying to get them off with light sentences. And is this Goff character an immigrant? Well, he has one of those interesting middle names, Atiba, and so is his last name, but I'll let you decide that one, though I should say he's biracial. These are his parents. So we got the intersectional thing going, as his type of cheap pseudo-scholar likes to say. Kristen Clark is definitely an immigrant. Her folks are from Jamaica, but obviously this guy praising Clark is meant to be counter-programming against how the Black media has been exposing her constantly. White media is trying to burnish the putrid reputation of Biden's DOJ and Merrick Garland in particular because they know we've been hitting them on their refusal to punish the police. So they hope that putting out a report, quote-unquote, will fool some Black people, and it will, but only the dumb ones. So this Goff character is just more of the same. When it comes to the kind of Negroes we see the white media putting on their shows, they definitely have a type they prefer, all right. This is the white media trying to credentialize guys like him through empty praise, and it's not going to work. Kristen Clark lied to the family of Ahmaud Arbery, and she did everything in her power to try to move his murderers to a cushy federal facility. She lied to the family of Ahmaud Arbery, misleading them into thinking that there wouldn't be a plea deal, and the moment the family's backs were turned, Kristen Clark had her operatives rush to the courthouse and try to ram a sweetheart plea deal for the murderers through before the family could stop it. But fortunately, Ahmaud Arbery's family was not fooled at all. They were monitoring the situation. They didn't trust Kristen Clark, and their suspicions were well-founded. They were in court to stop her. But even while they pleaded with the judge not to approve that dirty legal maneuver, Clark's DOJ reps didn't back down. They instead openly insulted the family in court, mocking them, telling the judge to ignore the family, and that giving the killers a lighter sentence would bring the family peace. The bastards actually had the nerve to say that. And this is who this piece of crap Goff says to thank God for? He has a strange way of saying the devil. And Merrick Garland has been part of the problem too, because there's no way that a case like this high profile, wasn't being closely monitored by him personally. And you better believe that every move that Kristen Clark made on that case had to be sent through him. You better believe he was looking over her shoulder. The white media, doing their job of whitewashing the government's behavior, only asked Merrick Garland one measly little question about the treatment of Ahmaud Arbery's family in that dirty would-be plea deal, to which Garland gave a 2-second non-response, and then nobody's ever mentioned it to him again. These bootlicking Negroes that you see the white media putting on their shows have never mentioned it. Not even one of them has. This is the Merrick Garland who the white media is trying to heap laudatory praise on for having issued this report. This is the guy who's standing there saying, the Minneapolis police clear pattern of racial discrimination. Well, we don't need a book report about the Minneapolis police's racism to know that they're racist. We've seen plenty of these kind of reports from the DOJ, but what we never see is punishment, which is the only thing that solves the problem of racism. A white supremacist cannot be reformed. They can only be punished. So understand that this is all PR for the Biden administration. He's trying to make it seem like they're doing something about police and the crimes that they commit, when in fact all they're doing is saying it exists. That's all that's happening here. Biden administration saying, oh yeah, racism in the police department, it exists all right. This is the trick that they always do. It doesn't cost the politicians anything to acknowledge racism in the police departments because it's impossible to deny it. But when it comes to finally punishing it, doing something about it, that's when you find they're not going to move, they're not going to lift a finger, not going to say a word. That's why Philip Goff didn't say a word about how the Biden administration sent his own Solicitor General to the Supreme Court to tell them to strike down the Miranda warning. He did that at the exact same time that he was signing his completely empty so-called executive order that only applies to federal policing organizations who black people have the least amount of contact with, by the way. He promised a White House-level police accountability commission, but that was while he was on the campaign trail. The second that he won the election, he hadn't even been sworn in before he was saying, that whole police accountability commission thing out of the White House, I don't have time for it. Congress needs to handle that. And that's the last that anyone ever heard of it. Every single promise that Biden made to the black community, feeble and pathetic and empty and insincere as they were, he broke those empty, insincere promises before he even took office. So the white media doesn't get to pretend as if they're giving us news. They're not. It's all smoke and mirrors. Or rather hot air. Biden and the Democrats promised us next to nothing, and somehow he managed to do even less than that. They actually gave the thugs in blue more money and didn't even require a single change in policy or personnel for the cops to get it. They could have used the power of the purse to force departments to do things, but they didn't. And then he doubled down on it by going to court and fighting against what little legal restraints there are against this taxpayer-supported street gang. These black faces you see the white media putting on your TV screens cheerleading for all of these anti-black policies, they're not committing some harmless crime. They help the white media sell the lie that black people don't really have a problem with what these racist politicians are doing, or in the case of Biden, not doing. These bootlicks will smile and nod their empty heads as this or that white media host says that Biden's doing all those things for us. Yep, master, you absolutely right. Whenever they try that, you just ask yourself, what change did this action that they're telling us to be happy over bring? Not what change is it going to bring down the line or what could it bring, but what has actually changed. Because one of the main tricks these white supremacists in the government use is empty rhetoric, weasel words. They imply a lot of things, but mostly it's hot air. They let your imagination fill in the blanks. And sadly, a lot of black people have very active imaginations. We imagine things that these politicians never said. And then worse than that, we never demand that they say what we want. It conditions us to settle for less and less until eventually we're settling for nothing. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't want another so-called report. By now, we all know they're not worth the paper they're written on. Good day. And be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Turk McKenzie, Ronald Rollins, Williams, Angela Merritt, and Bobby Ross. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.